All right, we're live. So, welcome to another edition of Adam Kyle Jackson Photography Live Edits. So, I'm trying to do one of these once a week, and these are not scripted. So, this is just me with Lightroom, Photoshop, the tools that I use, going through my photography and showing you some of the tips and tricks of how I do editing. And so, today we're going to talk about lighting, and I think we're going to focus on a couple of things here. It's not just processing a lightning photo today, because the way I do lightning is I rely heavily on the crop. So we're going to talk about how to find a good crop in the lightning photo. We're also going to talk about, once you crop, how do you control the noise? And so I want to make sure I have a noise-free image. And then how am I going to actually process the image to make it look like an epic storm photo? So I'm going to switch now over to Lightroom, and let's get started. So here's my screen. So I picked this photo for today because, for many reasons, there is a lot going on in the sky, and we could probably leave this photo as is and post it. So what are the things that we can do to make this image stand out even further? And so obviously I've got some lightning down here at the bottom that I want to emphasize, and the image overall is a little underexposed, and you can see the extreme vignetting. So this was shot with the Nikon D850 with the Nikkor 14 to 24 millimeter lens at 14 millimeters f3.2 at 1/80th of a second on the exposure. And I did this particular one handheld, getting lucky on a lightning bolt exposing when I happened to press the shutter. But with this particular image, I think we could do one of two things. We could leave it like this and accentuate the mammatus clouds that you see up here at the very top, or we can get real zoomed in and crop down to that lightning, which is, I think that's where we want to go. And so I'm going to try to get this edit done today in under 30 minutes or less. So let's see if we can do it. All right, here we go. So first things first, let's get rid of this vignette. There we go. So now I can start to see clearly that the image is underexposed. So now we need to adjust this exposure just a tad. I think we're going to pull this up. You don't want to blow out the lightning. So when you're messing with a lightning photo, in some cases you can make the entire image completely dark and just have the lightning exposed properly and still have a pretty cool looking image. On this one, I got a little bit lucky because it was right at sunset, and there was enough ambient light to make everything look appealing, interesting, and the colors were just amazing. So this is a raw file, and let's look at, and as you can see, let's put on the clipping. You can start to see, as I start messing with this exposure and pushing it, I'm at a stop. It's starting to blow out the lightning bolt, which I do not want that, because we need to save that for later. But I do want the rest of the image to look consistent with the brightness of this lightning. I don't want to lose detail on the clouds. I also want to see the foreground. So I think right about here is where we're going to land. And then we're going to play with the highlights. Let's pull those down. So this is where you can see, if we go all the way up with highlights, or if we take highlights all the way down, that's going to impact and affect the majority of the image that we're dealing with. You can see over to the far left, the highlights doesn't really do much. But right here where that lightning bolt is, I think we do want to take the highlights all the way down, just to single out that lightning against the background. And shadows, let's pull the shadows out. Now let's take a look at the whites and see how much I can actually push without damaging the lightning. So I'm going to land right around plus 28 on the white. Now blacks, I typically don't mess with blacks yet. And there's many reasons why, because I see in these storm photos a lot is that when you're pulling down the black, the foreground tends to oversaturate, the clouds start looking muddy. In some cases, I'll actually just pull the blacks all the way up to plus 100 and give me tons of headroom moving forward. And so I think I'm going to actually take that approach this time, because we're going to need as much of the data as possible to show here at the beginning step, because once we start cropping in, I'm going to start seeing some degradation and loss of the image quality, because these pixels will start showing themselves, and I actually start seeing it right now. It's starting to look a little bit more grainy now that we're starting to push things. But with the Nikon D850, we've got plenty of room to push. And the magic button for a storm photo is dehaze. Now, we don't want to mess with it yet because we haven't cropped, but I'm just going to show you here what this button does. So I've just pushed dehaze up to plus 86, and here you go. So you could say we can call it a day. Let's put some noise reduction on this and we're done. Dehaze is an extremely powerful tool. It does oversaturate everything, so you're gonna have to control the tones a bit, but dehaze does exactly what I want it to do, and we're gonna get back to that here in just a bit. We're not gonna do that now. Now, I think I've got the exposure exactly where I want it to be. And so on Adobe Color, I usually shift to Adobe Vivid. I think it just adds an additional punch. I don't use Adobe Landscape because I think it looks cartoonish in most cases. And then on the actual white balance, sometimes auto works. I see it shift a lot towards the yellow. I don't want the clouds to be yellow. I want them to be more of a natural ambient light. If we take it to the cloud itself, now it's gone to blue. I think the camera actually nailed it as shot. So let's take a look. I think that's about as good as I'm going to get, because if I shift a little too further to the yellow spectrum, the clouds turn yellow. If I try to remove the yellow from the clouds, the entire scene turns blue. So I think we're good where we're at. And I think it's time to start cropping. So now let's pick the crop. We can do many things here. So we're going to try to take this to Instagram. So we want to get it to a 4:5 ratio, so 4:5. And you want to ensure that it's portrait mode, so you have to just drag it down until it changes to portrait mode. And now we can start playing around with the crop. So we could make the lightning small and keep the image pretty much the same as it was in landscape mode, but I think we're going to do something a little bit more extreme today. Let's take this down to an extreme crop. Let's get this down to right about here, and I'm going to try my best to follow the rule of 1/3 within these clouds here. So let's make sure the lightning lines up a little bit right. Yeah, I think that'll do it, because now I've got the cloud, the top left corner of the thirds, and I've got the lightning bolt lined up with that first third. And I'm not going to worry about the foreground. So in my images, the foreground's kind of useless in most cases, because when you're storm chasing, you just take a picture of where the clouds are. So this is actually a pretty decent foreground for storm chasing, because there's not a lot of obstructions here. It's just grass, and so it doesn't really take away from the focus. The highlight here and the focus is going to be this lightning bolt. And so I think I like this crop right here. So I think this is the crop. I think this is where we're going. And I'm seeing now that I did blow out the lightning bolt a little bit, so I'm going to pull down the whites. And I think that looks pretty good. Now, I do have some issues here because I was shooting handheld. With it being in focus, it's a little wobbly. It's not too bad, but I think we can fix it using the Topaz tools. And so you can see the telephone pole is a little out of focus. The lightning bolt looks pretty good, but in general, the whole image could be sharpened quite a bit. I'm still messing with these whites because I want to make sure I'm not blowing out the lightning bolt. Now I could pull down the entire exposure, but I don't want to impact the clouds. I don't want anything else in the scene to go any darker than it already is. And by pulling down the whites, it's not really impacting the clouds as much as it is the lightning. So this is how I'm trying to control. I could do a radial filter right here on this lightning, and we could just go to town on the lightning bolt, but we're going to do that in the next step. I'm just trying to get the exposure right where I want it before I start doing anything destructive to this image. And so I think we're here. So the next step is take this thing over into Topaz. And typically I would do the denoise step first, but in my experience, what I'm seeing is that if I do have something that's out of focus like this, that's significantly out of focus, I just use the Sharpen AI tool. So Topaz Sharpen AI does have denoise capabilities within it, and it's actually pretty effective. And if I don't catch all the noise there, no worries, because we also have we could send it back to Topaz Denoise. But what I'm actually going to do is probably use the DxO Define to get rid of the noise. So let's see if we can get rid of some of this problem area here. So let's see if we can make this telephone pole come back to focus. Let's see if we can make the clouds look a little bit more crisp. And so Topaz, as good as it does take quite a bit of time. And so while we're waiting on Topaz, make sure you go follow Adam Kyle Jackson on Instagram. Hit me up on the comments if you have any questions about photography, storm chasing, these kinds of things. And then hit the comments here on this video if there's some things that you would like me to do, like me to see, do a live edit for you on anything that is a particular interest. If you want me to do a tool that I utilize, I talk about DxO, Lightroom, I talk about Photoshop. I even do Aurora HDR and the Luminar. And so I've used just about every single tool. But make sure you go find me, Instagram, Adam Kyle Jackson, and hit me in the comments if there's a question. I also got a Facebook group at Adam Kyle Jackson Photography. I just hit 1,800 today, so the growth in there, I've been hitting subscribers in there left and right, and it's just it's been an amazing journey in that group. People are submitting their photos and getting hundreds of likes in there. It's pretty awesome. So where are we at on getting the yeah, I've got beach ball. So the beach ball, here it goes. Topaz takes its sweet time. It's a great tool though. If you don't have Topaz Sharpen AI or the Denoise AI, I highly recommend you get it. It doesn't work always. And so there's some things about the Sharpen tool in Topaz that I don't like, and that it does destroy the clouds. It will make the clouds look really odd. It makes it look like it's got hair. But here we are with Topaz opening up, and now we're doing what's called the initializing step. And so it's going to sit here and try to analyze the image. We're going to put it in auto mode. It already sensed that the image needs to be stabilized, which is correct. And we're also going to do auto mode for the sharpness and noise suppression. And then because I'm in the super crop mode, since I've cropped down this landscape down to this portrait, I am going to put the extra noise suppression on while this thing is doing its thing. And so instead of waiting for it, you can sit here forever and wait for this thing to generate a preview. But what I typically do is just hit the apply button and let it roll. So you can measure the noise with DxO Define first if you have the DxO tools. And what I've found there is that if you do use the Define step, that it will completely remove all noise without losing a lot of the detail in the clouds. And so I'm curious, but Define won't sharpen a destabilized image like this. And so this is why I need this Topaz. This is if I'm shooting a handheld and I've got blurry things on the horizon line, we want to make sure that the image is sharp before I go into any other denoise steps. And so this is going to take a bit. Now we're at 17%. And the other plugins that you want to consider using are the Pro Contrast tool in Color Efex Pro. So Pro Contrast is one of the key tools that I use to get these storm images to look the way I do. And you'll see that I'm not going to add a lot of contrast in Lightroom to the thunderstorm. So Lightroom really for me is just the exposure, just the color balance, the initial sharpening steps, and then I move this over to Color Efex Pro, and then we really start adding some contrast and other things, including color and vignette. And so now we're at 42%. This is going to take a while. And so just so you know, this is a 2017 5K iMac that I'm on. I've got 64 gigs of RAM. I've got the i5. And so it chews up every bit of resources here. Not to mention that I'm also using Lightroom and probably have about 100,000 photos here. That probably when doing these videos, I'm going to have to move to my laptop that doesn't have all this bloat and stuff in it. So I even have on the laptop the Topaz tools, and it still takes forever to run through the sharpen process. but it is super important. You want this image sharp, because once you get everything in focus, then you can really control the noise and then start applying all the destructive techniques that we're about to do. So now we're 83, 92. And drum roll. And so if you see the beach ball of death, it typically means that it's over, it's done. And now we're about to import it back into Lightroom, and here it is. Now I want to make sure that I didn't lose it. Where'd it go? Where'd you go? Did it send it back to the end? Yep. It did. So now I've got the image. I think we're back in focus now. So let's compare this back and forth. I think it didn't destroy the clouds either. So I think we're looking good here. So just from initial impression, I think Topaz did its job. It's still thinking about it, but I think it did its job. So let's go and zoom in on this thing. And yeah, it looks good. So now the telephone pole is more in focus. The lightning bolt is more crisp. The edges of the clouds are more crisp. So this is a very valuable step. And it did get rid of a lot of the noise problem in here. So now the next step is we need to remove noise even further. I want to make sure there's no noise moving forward. Now that I've got a relatively in focus lightning shot here, let's go push this over into Define, which is in the Nik collection by DxO. It's Define 2. And what we're going to do is run this through another round of denoise, and just to see if there's any more opportunity to make this thing even more clearer. And you'll know pretty quickly once it loads into denoise whether or not you can push it even further, because it'll actually start degrading the image. But in most cases, I usually take 2 to 3 denoise rounds on just about any image that I'm processing, because I tend to process my images and I want to make sure that at the end it's not looking muddy. I want no camera noise. I don't want any banding in the sky because we have these gradients. And so I want to make sure that it looks perfect and crisp. And so denoise is working great here. So I can see denoise gives you a loop. The define step gives you a loop down at the bottom right. And it shows you the before and after before you hit save. And so it measured the profile here, and I can clearly see it removed every last ounce of noise. So I'm just going to hit save because it did its job. And so now that we have a completely noise-free image, now we can start editing. And I'm going to start using some filters here. Let's make sure that we didn't destroy anything in this image. Let's compare back and forth. And you can see the grain in the before, and now in the after, it's completely smooth. There's zero noise in this image now. So now we could just leave it like this. We could post it, but what kind of fun would that be? So let's go see if we can really process this image. Let's pull this sky down a little bit. So I'm going to grab a gradient filter tool, and here's where I start really adjusting the exposure, trying to get the lightning to look standing out amongst the clouds. I want the colors to stand out. So I'm going to adjust the exposure down. I'm going to hit the black down, and then we're going to hit dehaze and see. And now you can start to see the blues pop out. You can see the detail in the clouds pop out. And as I pull this filter down, now that lightning stands out. It's super isolated. It's punchy. And I think that I don't like what dehaze is doing to the clouds here, so we could probably fix that with some radial tools, kind of pull the exposure back up. But for the most part, I do like the surrounding area. I don't like that it's actually interacting with the foreground here, so let's pull this up just a bit, and let's leave this be. And so let's look at before and after. So here's before, which looks cool. It's a little washed out because we pulled all the blacks and everything out. But I want it to be super contrasty around that lightning bolt. And so here, the lightning bolt is super punchy. Everything is crisp and clear. So now let's pull a radial tool and let's get the cloud exposure corrected. And I could use probably a range mask here. And now remember, none of this is scripted, and I try to process every image individually like it's a project. And I've processed this image before, and so I'm kind of challenging myself to see if I can get the steps right and get it to look just as good or better than what I have already processed it like. And so right now what I'm doing is I'm trying to get the clouds to come back to life, and that did it right there. So what I'm doing is I'm using a color mask, and I want the white in the clouds to shine through, but I also want the shadows to be left alone. So it's kind of like a dodge and burn in the clouds, which gives it this depth. And that's exactly what happened here. And I think I don't like the yellow either. So let's pull some of that yellow out. I'm going to adjust the yellow only on the white. So we're going to go to the blue on the temperature. And that looks good. And so I'm always looking at the small image at the top left of Lightroom to make sure I don't have any imbalance here. And that's my trick to make sure that if I'm doing any of these kind of edits like what I just did, that it didn't throw the rest of the image off. And I'm adding another, all I'm doing is just copying, pasting, do a duplicate. To add this one back over here, that added some more brightness to that. And I think this is good because this right here is one of the cores of the supercell. This is a multicellular cloud system. And so here's the hail shaft, and here's the lightning bolt on the backside of the storm. And there's the Mammatus clouds. And so I want the clouds to really pop out. And then we also want these blues to pop out. So let's go grab another radial filter tool. And let's do a color mask. So hit range mask, color. And we're going to take this over to one of the blue colors. There's a few different shades of blue in here. Don't stress it too badly. Just pick one of them. And then you can either take the exposure down or you can move it up. And then you can add just a hint, just a tad, like -2, -3 of blue, and then just a hint of green. Just a hint. And I think that did it. That makes it look really nice. And I can see here, we caught some of the lightning bolt here. We also have some of this halo here around the lightning. So I want to accentuate some of that purple halo without making the clouds brighter. So let's do another color mask. Take the dropper and then just pick on the very edge where that purple is. And then we can pull that up. We can adjust, and you can see I can adjust now just that color. And I think I'm going to add just maybe a tad of exposure and a little bit of blue and then a little bit of the red. And there we go. That added just a little bit of contrast. And that cloud now comes to the foreground a lot better than it did before. And then I'm going to adjust the foreground here with another radial filter tool. Let's add some brightness to the foreground. We'll do that because we're going to add a vignette later, and I want to make sure that I'm not completely darkening and oversaturating the foreground using the vignette. And so I'm just adding a whole bunch of series of radial filter tools just where my eye says it should go. And I don't like this darkness on the hill here, and I don't want to impact where the lightning's at. So I'm going to use a color mask, and I'm going to take the dropper, and we're going to hit the hillside right where that orange is at, and we're going to pull the exposure up on the orange. And that looks perfect. So now the foreground looks great. I think the clouds look great. The lightning looks great. So I think we're in business. So now we can take a radial filter tool and see if we can make this lightning stand out just a bit. And the way I typically do that is you can use one of two things. You can use color or luminance. And if you use either one, it'll typically work without affecting anything around the lightning, because the lightning is basically bright white. And so if you take the dropper and hit just the area of bright white, everything else around it is not affected. And so now you can just see that the lightning bolt comes to life. and I'm going to pull that exposure up right up until where it starts clipping. And I'm always monitoring the smaller image to make sure that I'm not messing up the balance of this image. And then we might want to add a little bit of the purple here. And we may also want to pull down on the warmth in the lightning because I want it to be a little more pink hue because that's the way it looks in real life. And then the next thing is we want to pull the black down. And this is the real trick, is if you pull the light down, the black down around the lightning bolt, that lightning bolt comes straight to the foreground, pops out, and it's very clear what you're looking at. Also adds just a little bit of saturation around the lightning bolt, makes it look like a ghost out in the middle of the storm, and that's what I'm going for here. And then I'm just going to generally add a radial filter tool with the lightning bolt as my center point to give it a halo effect. And so here we are adding just a little bit more exposure. So as I add things to the lightning bolt, I'm also adjusting the rest of the image around it to ensure that the entire composition, the exposure, everything makes sense relative to that lightning bolt. And right here, I want that to be a little bit brighter. And so now let's take a look. Let's look at this. So let's look at before. Let's look at it before. Let's look at it from, I'm going to reset the raw file, and I'm going to show you where we started. And so this is going to be resetting. Here's the raw file, and it takes a bit for it to generate. So here's what it was before. This is straight out of the camera. And if you saw the JPEG that the camera, I wish I had put the JPEG here so you could see it. If you put the JPEG up, I think the camera processed this image better than I could ever do. The JPEG version just looks amazing, and it's got all the color. It's very saturated. It's punchy, and it just something that Mother Nature created. I mean, this is insane. The colors here. You got the greens, you got the yellow tones, the purple, and the lightning. And so all I wanted to do was preserve as much of that as possible by adding a few filters here and there, but still making sure that we're keeping the integrity of the image and making it true. And stuff like this, if you see, this is the raw file. So this is as raw can get. This is what the camera saw. There's these green halos all throughout the image. And I'll show you what that looks like using dehaze. And so you can see all throughout the image, this is closer, this right here, now that I've added some contrast back to it, is closer to what the eye was seeing. So it was fairly dark, and this is what it looks like. So one of the most amazing storms I've ever seen in my entire life. This was in Perryton, Texas, and I just got super lucky. I pulled over on the side of the road and saw lightning flashing in the distance, and then this started happening. So here we are. This is my edit. Now that I've looked at the reference point, I can see that I've pulled up the exposure too bright on the clouds, which is an easy fix because all I'm using is radial filter. So I go select the applicable filter and pull the exposure down, and that fixed it. And I think I pulled it up too high here as well. So there's no right or wrong, because really you're trying to mimic. Let me show you Mother Nature. Mother Nature and the raw file. How do you mimic this? How do you make this? How do you recreate this? And so it's an amazing cloud system with these crazy mammatus clouds and a lot of internal lightning in the clouds with a bunch of hail, which created these crazy blue greens, just awesome looking. So we'll get there. And so this was the step right before we started editing. And so now here's where we're at. So I'm getting close. I'm getting very close. I'm getting close to being happy here. And hopefully, I think once I start putting this into DxO and the Nik collection, hopefully the computer doesn't start crashing. So I've upgraded to Photoshop 2021 and it does not like it. So let's go look at the colors. Let's actually enhance some of the things that I want to in here and make some of the things go away. So I think the yellow, I don't like the yellow hue. You can see it just looks, if I take yellow on the saturation, the HSL panel, it just turns it to a murky, ugly yellow. And it only affects the top of these clouds. So I think I'm going to pull the yellow down because I think that's going to become a problem and oversaturate as I start pushing the image further. So I'm going to take some of that yellow out. I do like the blue. So let's see what blue does. So if we pull blue out, so there's a lot of blue in this image. And so you got to be very careful with it, because if you want blue in one area, it's still going to affect another area that you might not want blue. Now let's take a look at aqua, which it should impact those areas at the top, and it does, but it starts doing color banding quickly. And so this is what you do not want. You don't want a line, a very distinct line of color at the top, bottom. It usually happens around the vignette. When you start adding vignette, you don't want color banding. And so you just got to be very careful when you're adapting these colors. And I think I'm about as good as it's going to get. I think the only thing I really needed to do was remove some of the yellow from the top of that cloud. Now let's take a look at luminance and see if we can affect this image. And so I do like adding some luminance to the blue, so that way the lightning, the internal lightning, the halo core glow comes out just a little bit more. So let's take a look at what happens if we mess with the yellow. That's something that I think we need to increase on the luminance, because the clouds do need to pop out a little bit more. So I'm gonna add a little bit to the yellow. Let's take a look at orange. Add just a tad to the orange. Now, here's another trick that I use for lightning. And typically on a lightning bolt, you'll have a very strong magenta halo around the entire lightning bolt. And it's very difficult to edit. And I'll show you an example right now of a lightning bolt. One of the closest strikes to me that I think I've encountered and witnessed in recent years. And this lightning bolt, even before it's even focused, you can see this strong purple. There's a strong purple halo, and I'll demonstrate that. Let's go and zoom up even more. So you can see in this lightning, you see this strong purple magenta halo all around the lightning bolt, and it can look really exaggerated quickly if you start hitting with clarity, if you try to make the lightning bolt stand out more. But this one is pretty bad, and I'll show you what happens when you start messing with the luminance. And so I've taken the luminance of purple and magenta all the way down to demonstrate here's what's around the lightning. And so the way I address this is I typically take the saturation of either purple or magenta all the way down. And now you can see it's cleaned up this whole lightning bolt scene. The whole thing is clean, and it doesn't look as bad as it did. So now let's add the purple and magenta color back. And so now all you're doing is adding luminance back to a white lightning bolt versus adding a purple background. And now the lightning bolt stands out even more. So that's just a trick that I utilize. Unfortunately, on this image that we're processing today, the whole thing is purple. So if I start messing with purple, I do want purple in the halo here, in the hail. So this is a hail core, and the lightning striking through the rain. The hail looks awesome, looks like a ghost in the middle of the night. And if I start messing with purple, it starts getting banding quickly. And you can see the banding happening now that I'm messing with it. And so this is magenta. Magenta is your lightning bolt. Magenta usually is the entire color of lightning and that halo I just showed you a second ago. So you got to be very careful with what you're doing on the saturation, because it will mess it up quickly and you'll start seeing banding if it's a purple scene. And so I think I'm going to leave that alone. I think we're here. I think we're about as good as it's going to get. I'm going to add just a tad of highlight at the top of this lightning bolt to balance it against the bottom. And I'm going to check my screen at the top left, make sure I'm not screwing anything up here. That looks much better. So now we're looking a little bit more balanced. All right, so now I've got let's see the steps. Let's recap. So we took a raw file that was landscape. We went from a landscape lightning scene that looks like this. This is the raw file. Let me take dehaze off. This is the raw file. So we went from here. We could have gone many directions with this. We could have processed it. We could have left it alone and just this is Mother Nature at its finest. We could have just left this raw file alone and taken this to print. But I decided to crop in and accentuate the lightning, highlight the clouds, adjusted the exposure here, and then through a series of radio filter tools, graduated tools, I've now gotten the image pretty close to where I think it needs to be. So now the next step, oh, and don't forget, make sure you're in focus and you've taken the proper steps of getting rid of noise, or else we can't go further. Then I'm going to show you just in a second why. So now I'm going to take this into DxO Nik collection, and I'm going to hit it with a series of filters that I like using to process these storm photos. Just to give it an extra bit of oomph. So I get asked a lot, like, well, how did you process this? Where'd the color come from? Where'd you get the lightning from? Did you copy and paste lightning in there? You know, and I understand those questions because there are some folks that do sky replacement. There's people that do put lightning bolts in where they shouldn't, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just if as long as you're transparent with what you're doing. And on my stuff, I don't Photoshop the lightning in, and I don't Photoshop skies. I don't do sky replacement. And in some cases, Mother Nature just did look that insane that it's even difficult for me to replicate it. And actually, it's difficult to replicate what the camera JPEG processor did. So that's kind of my goal, is to make sure that I don't mess with it so much that it doesn't look like Mother Nature anymore. And as you can see, the raw file looks pretty crazy. So let's go to our filter. So now we're in the Nik collection. This is Color Efex Pro. And it's just a series, a panel of filters that you can build, and you can stack these things. And I'm going to be doing an individual tutorial on each of these filters and making sure that I explain what each one does in the next coming weeks. And so be looking for those videos. So Pro Contrast, one of my favorite. You can use the correct color cast, and it's probably going to think there's too much yellow in this image because I can see it, and it does. And so I'm going to actually use correct color cast this time. Now let's correct the contrast. And this is where you can really start to screw your image up. So I'm going to do super exaggerated, so that way you can see that, you know, you can make this image look like an HDR image in a matter of seconds with these tools. They're very powerful. Now that I'm adding contrast to it, I'm going to leave the color cast alone because I do like what this looks like. Now what's really cool about these filters is I can get rid of, like, for example, adding contrast is going to blow the lightning highlights out, make it look terrible. So I'm going to remove the effect just from the lightning. And as you can see from the loop here, now the lightning is back to normal. And I also think I want to take the effect off right here. It's causing a halo around the lightning that we do not want. And so I only want to apply contrast to certain areas of the image. And so that's what I'm doing right now. I'm taking it away from the lightning because don't really need it there. So now let's see A/B test. So here is before, here's after. So you can see the contrast really does help. It pops it out and makes it look super punchy and clear. Now what I want to do is add a vignette, and we're going to see once you start adding the vignette, this is where the magic happens. And I don't add a traditional vignette. I use darken, light, and center. And what I love about it is it enables this halo effect. So if you want to, and I'm going to do this extreme so you can see the effect, you can take the center luminosity to whatever exposure you want. You can also place the center of where the radiance is going to come from. So let's say we wanted the focus to be on lightning. I just now took place center, stuck it on the lightning, and said that's where we want our focus point to be. And I don't like that. So, but you can make this anywhere. You can take this to like someone's face, and you wanted to highlight someone's face in an image. This is what this is for. So I'm going to start this process over because I like the stock. So I'm going to add a darken, light, and center again. Oh, this is something lesson learned. So if you don't push add filter, it will eat the filter that you're currently using. So I just ate my Pro Contrast step here. So I'm going to go ahead and add Pro Contrast back again. And again, no worries, because every image that I process, I take it one step at a time as it's an individual project. But I've gotten to the point now, and this is what I hope for you guys if you're trying to just learning how to process images, that it doesn't matter because I know exactly what I'm looking for. And I know now that I can take these filters and make them anything I want. So right now, again, I'm going to have to go back and take a look here at the bottom right. Take a look at this loop. And you can see where the lightning is completely blown out, and adding contrast added a halo where the lightning's likely interacting with the raindrops and creating this luminance. I don't want that. So I'm going to take my minus, click the lightning bolt, and now take a look at the loop again. It's completely fixed. And so I want to make sure I'm protecting the lightning bolt. I don't want any blown out highlights. I don't want any halo around it that's going to eliminate the crispness of the lightning bolt. I want it to be super sharp, crisp, clear. And that looks good now. So now we're back to normal. Now, I think with the dark and light and center, I think that nails it. So I'm going to adjust this to make it more of a radial filter. So there's 1 and 2. 1 is a square, 2 is a circle. So we're going to use the circle. And then I'm going to pull down the center exposure just a bit. And then I play with the border luminosity until I get the halo effect that I'm trying to achieve. And I love this because it does saturate the color. So as you're pulling down the exposure, it's saturating it. And this is starting to look great. So this is the effect I was going for. Now the other step is taking a vignette lens, and I know I said I don't add traditional vignette, but I do, but that's not what's creating the vignette. With the vignette lens, I'm usually only adding about -2 to -3 just to give it that one extra. And you can see it's kind of got just this extra depth now to it when it's interacting with this dark and light and center. And now you can see that lightning, your eye is just drawn straight to that lightning bolt. The top area looks really cool with the mammatus clouds in the blue. The clouds here look awesome. They're super crisp. There's no noise. Remember, get rid of noise before you start doing these things. And when you look in the loop, take a look at the bottom right here in this loop, you can see, let's go to an area where you would expect noise. There's zero noise in this image, none whatsoever. And we've done some pretty destructive things to it already. So now let's go through. Now you could take this another step further. I think I'm happy with it right now, but you could add glamour glow, which would add an Orton effect to the clouds. And we can demonstrate that right now. And so now you see it's more of an ethereal, dreamy look. Let's take glamour glow off. Here it is off. Here it is on. Either way, I think this one I'm going to leave glamour glow off because I do like the crispness of the clouds. Now let's add another filter. And this is where I start doing some dodge and burn within Color Efex Pro. It's a very powerful, very, very, very powerful tool. And so if you want to do dodge and burn quickly, here's the trick. Graduated neutral density filter. Pull the upper tonality down to where you start seeing exactly what you're looking for with the saturation, with the tones, everything that you're looking for. And then you start using the minus to pull out of areas where you don't want it. And so I don't want any dark area in the blue. I want this blue to come highlight out against the backdrop of these dark, ominous clouds, and effectively doing dodge and burn. And that looks good. So let's take a look, and just adds that just subtle dark punch to that cloud base up there. And I think it may have made the corner a little too dark on the top left. Let's fix that. And that's it. That's what we need. And you can do the same thing too with the bottom part of the image. So if you wanted to add some exposure, maybe to the foreground here, I don't think I'm going to need to. And what I typically do is I stack these graduated neutral density filters. I don't do lower tonality and upper tonality on the same filter. I do different filters. And I also stack filters on top of filters in most cases. So the next step here is I want to see if we can take this vertical shift down and see where I really want this effect to land. So what I'm looking for is a point in the image where I don't want this upper tonality to affect at all. And I think that's it. And this is all trial and error. And so that pulls out this little lightning bolt here. You can see the lightning here still is looking pretty crisp, sharp. I think I'm happy. So we're going to save this. And I think I failed. I failed at my 30 minutes or less. But you can see that within about 45 minutes, I've taken a raw file. I'm trying to recreate the raw file. I've taken this raw file right here and have taken it through a series of steps to get it to look like this, which to me looks pretty dang close to what the raw file is showing us. But with the exception of I don't have any noise, I have the images in razor sharp focus, and the colors are just a little more punchy. So now that I've gotten it out of the Color Efex Pro step from Nik Collection, I go look at my white balance and see where I'm at again. And this is an iterative process going back and forth. And I don't like what Auto did, but I can tell that there is too much magenta in the image, which is fine because I want it to be there. And as a matter of fact, we might actually increase. Let's go look at the warmth. Do we want it to be more warm or do we want it to be more blue? And so this is just trial and error. And I think that's it. That's it. I landed exactly where I wanted to be. And I have a processed cloud image with lightning. Now, if you want to go crazy on this for the next 3 or 4 hours, which I'm not going to bore you guys with, but I do want to show you, this is my next step, is I take it into Photoshop and I'm going to add just a touch of dodge and burn across some of these areas in the clouds. And maybe we'll do that here. Maybe I can get this done in the next 5 minutes. We're going to do a quick dodge and burn routine. And so I'll take a global adjustment. We're going to dodge on the lightning just to give it a little bit of punch. Just a little bit of punch on the clouds here. Just a punch here, punch there, and there. And so just these subtle changes, I'll show you the A/B. So here's the before, here's after. It just gives it just a little extra layer of something, just a little bit of depth. And you could sit here and play with this forever. And so I'm going to increase the foreground. I'm going to hit this over here again. And then if you wanted to get even more granular and get into some crazy details, that's where you pull the size of the dodge or burn down, and then you go hit these specific areas. Like right here, I think needs it. Right here, there's the area here. And if you mess up, just hit Control Z or Command Z and fix it. So I think I'm good. I think if I keep messing with this, it's just going to mess it up. And I believe that I have created what Mother Nature had intended. So what do you guys think? Leave a comment below if you think that, did I win or did nature win? Mother Nature, I think, of course, always wins. But I wanted to get, this is the unedited raw file. I wanted to get a accurate representation that still had a little bit of interest, color, punch, without going crazy with it. And so this is the end result. Compare that to this. I think we're close. So, well, thank you for joining me. I hope you're enjoying these live edits. I'm going to continue doing these every week. And my goal is to try to get these under a 30-minute time frame. And I think I can get there. So if you have any questions, comments, anything about the tools that I'm using here, if you'd like me to cover something specific on a live edit, put it in the comments below, and I'll incorporate that into my routine. I'm also going to be doing a video on each of these filters that I've talked about, at least the ones that I use and enjoy using, and explain how to use each one of them in depth, just specific to that filter. So that way, if we talk about Pro Contrast, you can quickly go back and watch my video on Pro Contrast and understand, hey, this is what this means. The other thing is I'm going to go through my routines on HDR that I have not really talked a lot about. I don't typically do HDR, but there are some things that we want to consider when doing HDR, and there's some tools that I specifically use, including Aurora HDR, that I think would be helpful to go through. So if there's anything that you would like me to talk about, if there's anything that you would like me to edit, if there's something that you want me to cover here, if there's anything that I can do to improve these, let me know in the comments. Well, thank you for joining me. I think I have another 15,000 hours of editing to go. And if you want to talk to me, come find me on Facebook group, Adam Kyle Jackson. Just go search it. 1,800 folks. Last week it was 1,700, so keep doing this. And come find me on Instagram, Adam Kyle Jackson. Thank you for joining me. Y'all have a good one.